This video is sponsored by Describe. Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where I break down the lessons we can learn, as GMs and as players, from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling the bonus episode, The Night Before Critmas, run by Liam O'Brien back in 2018. And this one-shot has quite the reputation in this community because it is iconic and chaotic. This bonus episode was commissioned by my Patreon member, Shadow Lean. If you'd like to commission me to discuss another Critical Role one-shot as a bonus episode on this channel, you can do that by signing up for my Patreon at the Programmed Illusion level. I've got a few other commissioned one-shots scheduled for the first few months of the new year, but there are still a ton of unclaimed Critical Role one-shots. And so if there's one in particular you'd like to see me discuss in the future, hit me up on my Patreon. You can even just join for free and message me to find out which one-shots are still on the table, and then decide if you want to become a paid member. But if joining the Patreon isn't on the table for you, that's totally fine too. I'm honestly just happy you're here and watching the show. So, let's get on with it, let's get into the game. Also, I should point out, I'm a little stuffy right now, and my eyes are a little puffy. It is so windy where we are, and I had the windows open all day as I was getting all this set up. This just went up today. So, if I'm a little bit stuffy or runny-nosed, that's why. But that's actually kind of thematically appropriate because while this episode does have a guest star, Julie Nathanson, it also, unfortunately, doesn't include Laura. She had to bow out at the last minute because she was feeling under the weather. It was actually so last minute that her character is still in the official art piece of all the characters, the same one that was used as the thumbnail for the video. Her character is the one with the purple hair, which is pretty funny if you've seen the art for another character she plays at a much later date. But you might have noticed something else about this piece of art. The characters are playing Christmas elves. I don't know what stats they're using for a Christmas elf character ancestry. My guess is they're probably more gnome than elf. But either way, our characters are the elves working at the toy assembly line at Santa's workshop. Although not all of them are toy-making elves. See, ironically, given one of the players was out sick, but the elves at Santa's workshop have been hit with a nasty stomach flu. So some of the elves have different skill sets, but they were pulled onto the assembly line to fill in, since it is, of course, Christmas Eve at the North Pole with just a little over 30 minutes left until Santa has to take off. This is a really smart setup because it puts all the elves in one place for some early skill challenges, which we'll see in a minute, but also means the elves can all have different skill sets since they all do different things at the North Pole. They're not all toy makers. So here are the cast of characters in this episode. Taliesin plays Arthur Fizzlebottom, a layabout and ne'er-do-well who only gets away with things because his dad greases palms with Christmas cookies, so Arthur's never really gotten in trouble. Arthur is, appropriately enough, a rogue with the thief subclass. He's actually usually working the assembly line along with Travis's character, Chutney Chocolate Cane. Unlike Arthur, Chutney has been working on the assembly line for ages, and he's just a grumpy old codger.
I remember when toys were one piece of wood. You and your fingers.
Chutney is also a rogue, just like Arthur, only with the Mastermind subclass. Matt is playing Klaus Prigman, the hard-as-nails head of security for the North Pole. He uses the stats of a Battle Master fighter. Sam plays Bunglestein Sprucenberg, a neurotic elf who works in the stables, and spent a lot of time shoveling reindeer crap. He's a fighter, and the Critical Role wiki says that he uses the Samurai subclass. Also, as we learned throughout the course of the episode, Bunglestein Sprucenberg is Jewish, and that was actually probably already clear from his name. And definitely was clear from his voice.
But you're also good with a wrench, and keep Santa's sleigh in working order too, so while a little meek and neurotic, you're not without your uses.
If you say so, I'll take your word for it.
Marisha plays Cranberry Stockings, a lumberjack elf and champion of the Tinder Sports Olympics. She has a red beard that's been dyed green on one side to further represent the Christmas spirit. Cranberry is a War Domain cleric. Julie plays Ellery Jinglegumdrop, an excited fangirl who's been hoping to work with all these legendary elves for her entire life and is just a real big fan. She is a Life Domain cleric, and both of the clerics get their power from Santa and Christmas cheer. And Ashley plays Nutmeg Gingersnap, an elf who has been stationed in Macy's in New York City, gathering intel on what the toys the kids like, but her cover was compromised so she was called back to the North Pole. Obviously, this is a reference to Ashley's work in New York, filming Blind Spot, just a bit of meta humor from Liam there. Nutmeg is a wizard, but the Critical Role wiki doesn't know what her subclass is. Now, I know that was a lot of names all at once, and it's going to be hard to keep them all straight today, especially since you won't be able to associate them with the players or even their distinct character voices, the same way you can when you're watching the one-shot. It's just going to be me describing what these characters do, and that's not necessarily the best way to keep them straight in your head. However, the reason I wanted to highlight these characters right up front here is to make sure that you understand just how great they are. First of all, we got a fantastic range of personalities here to bounce off of each other. And second, These names are perfect. Our players are all completely on the same page about the tone of this game, and the names of their characters helps demonstrate that. At first I thought Liam might have named these characters, but honestly, throughout the episode he seems continuously delighted by these names, so it doesn't seem like he created them himself. It seems like the players named their own characters. We don't know how the character creation process worked, if Liam gave them some example names, or if they just bounced ideas off of each other in a group chat, or maybe even started throwing names around and kept one-upping each other. This is pure speculation on my part, but I really get the sense that that is what happened. After all, Laura's character would have been named Belle Mistletoe's, a very solid elf name. But it doesn't really come close to the unleashed Christmas whimsy behind Chutney Chocolate Cane, or Nutmeg Ginger Snap, or Ellery Jingle Gumdrop, or even Bunglestein Sprucenberg. So I really get the sense that these players were trying to one-up each other. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my theory. However, I also think it's very interesting that most of these characters have doubled up on classes. We've got 2 clerics, 2 rogues, and 2 fighters. I wonder if the players just had specific ideas for how to translate these specific classes into the game, or if Liam basically dictated that some character classes wouldn't make sense as Christmas elves. After all, I could imagine a Christmas elf paladin dedicated to Christmas cheer, but a druid might be a bit tougher to picture. Still, I love when the players have that freedom, and it actually might be fun to run a Christmas one-shot where the cast all plays Christmas elves, but they have the freedom to play any class they want. I mean, imagine a bard who sings Christmas carols, or a warlock who draws power from the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, or maybe a sorcerer who can trace their powers back to Jack Frost, or a barbarian elf who grew up among the Yetis, or even just an elf artificer who is an expert in making toys. That would be so much fun. Man, just imagine— No, Mike, stop it, no. No, you do not have time to run another game of D&D this month. Stop it. Anyway, now that the characters have been introduced, the players jump into their first scenario. Bixby Whimperump, wow, Santa's right-hand man, comes in and assigns them their next task. By the way, Bixby was also the name of Sam's animal companion, his neighbor's pug, in Liam's first one-shot on the channel. Coincidence? I don't know, actually. I would be interested to examine that, because it feels like this could be a deliberate reference, like there's going to be a Bixby in all of Liam's games, but I actually don't think Bixby's show up in any of the other games, so I think this actually just is a coincidence. Anyway, Bixby commands them to make Vox Machina action figures. That was a joke at the time. They didn't actually have Vox Machina action figures, unlike they do today, because last 6 years have been pretty wild for Critical Role. So as they assemble the action figures, they have to do a skill challenge. This is great because it gives the players something to do right off the bat. I have a lot of affection for the "You Start in a Tavern" intro. I literally just used it in a session on Saturday, but it has some disadvantages as well. I'll dive into those a lot more in a future video. But in short, when you just drop your players into a tavern, there's not a lot for them to do or interact with. They can make an introductory choice about how their characters are spending their time, but there's not a lot of consequence to that because nothing can happen until you start the story. Very occasionally, some characters will bring themselves into conflict and begin pushing the story forward themselves. We actually saw that in the intro to Campaign 2 of Critical Role. But otherwise, it can be a really undramatic opening. Here, Liam sidesteps that issue by throwing his players onto a factory floor together and giving them a task. Sure, there are high stakes. We gotta get these done by Christmas. But also the stakes are still pretty low compared to, most things that happen in a D&D game. But it still gives them a chance to interact with their character sheets and to be in the middle of something right as the story begins, which is just a much more dramatic opening. After they assemble the toys, Bixby returns and notices that the wind has knocked the star off of the top of the Christmas tree inside the workshop. And it's not just any star, it's the Star of Pure Intent. It's a clockwork star with a gently glowing ruby at the heart of it, and when they put it back on the tree, they're now rolling with advantage. Bixby goes to check out an intruder alert, but he says it's nothing, and he sets the elves to work on building Mighty 9 action figures. And thanks to rolling with advantage, they do pretty well. And you might think, hey, why are they rolling with advantage? Sure, narratively it makes sense because of the star, but dramatically, doesn't this reduce the tension of the scene? But it's actually going to serve the story better if they can successfully get all these toys built in time for Christmas. Because then, when some other stuff happens, it's going to feel more impactful because the elves actually did bust their asses to get the toys done on time and theoretically succeeded if they're rolling with advantage. And perhaps it will also be useful to establish that the elves thrive in their home under the light of Santa's magic. That perhaps if they are later no longer in this winter wonderland, their skills might suffer, and that can be represented by no longer rolling with advantage. Bixby comes back and tasks them to build some bears, which is a reference to Marisha's Honey Heist, which is actually one of the other one-shots we're talking about in the next couple months, probably in January. And he actually uses a magic fiddle to make the elves work faster, but they still have advantage, so it doesn't punish them in any way mechanically, it's just a break glass in case of emergency tool, but that's not represented in any of the mechanics. And most of the bears turn out pretty well. And with just enough time on the clock, they manage to get the last toys done before Santa's flight. And speaking of the big man himself, in he comes busting through the doors. It's Santa.
Merry Christmas, one and all. I can't tell you how much I want to do the whole thing like Brian Blessed. But I won't do that.
He thanks them all for their hard work, grabs the bag of toys, and goes outside. The elves hear him call it to the reindeer, and then he's cut off by a whomping sound, and he goes silent. The elves pop their heads out, and they find the sleigh toppled over, and Santa is gone. His bag is still there, but there's some tracks through the snow, something leaving 3-toed feet in the footprints, and they look around, and they only just manage to spot a huge sack moving away. Not Santa's sack, but something else. But then they hear a voice call out from the top of the roof. Someone shouts, "The fat man is ours." Liam goes to get his map, and he has them all roll for initiative while he does so, which is really smart. I like that. That's really cool. It saves time, because if you're in the situation as these guys, where the maps are already in another room, or even if they're already drawn, you just have to pull them out, having the players roll initiative is a nice way to keep them busy while you get your maps out. And then he places the minis, and he describes the elves' new foes.
Pale, skinned hag of a woman standing down on top of Santa's workshop, leering at you, saying, "Oh, flesh, so fresh!" And she's leering out from under the brim of a tall, purplish hat and purple, filthy robes, and her eyes hang sallow underneath, and just the teeth look mangy and brown and covered with filth, and she licks those brown teeth staring at you, and then you hear and off to the sides in the tree line are two more fun guys. You see a red, dark-skinned figure with horns and a tail lashing behind him, carrying some sort of metal staff with which look like octopus tentacles, raking it across the snow, menacing like this. And over here is a dead guy.
A dead guy.
You see a dead corpse of a man, maybe, with a long raked gray iron sword dragging through the snow, and one hand just hanging limp, and half of his ribs are gone, and he's going and we start this battle with Arthur.
Now, if these descriptions sound familiar, a purple-robed hag, a red-skinned devil, and a skeleton or a zombie, that's because these are D&D equivalents of the costumes worn by the 3 little kids from Nightmare Before Christmas. The same 3 kids who, kidnapped Santa. That's right, we're doing the movie. These 3 kids have been reinterpreted as actual monsters from D&D, but obviously, thematically, it's just the thing from the movie. And after the fight, as the game continues, the players are going to realize exactly how obvious it is that Liam is just doing that movie. But first we get our first fight of the episode. And since these characters are supposed to be Christmas elves, but they also have standard D&D character sheets, the characters' tricks and tools have to be reskinned as more appropriate objects. Arthur's short bow is made of an erector set and fires sharpened Legos. Bunglestein's crossbow is a slingshot with a sharpened jingle bell as ammunition. Nutmeg uses ribbon dancing ribbon to cast spells and make attacks. Claus has 2 big candy canes he wields in combat. Cranberry's Toll the Dead spell manifests itself as jingle bells, and Chutney stabs his targets with a wood chisel. Now, aside from the players just having fun descriptions of their weapons, there aren't a lot of noteworthy moments from this fight. It's pretty straightforward. The players just kill these monsters to death. But it's notable that they're still rolling with advantage thanks to the star. At least when they roll poorly, and remember to ask Liam if they're still within the star's radius. So, they're kind of primed to do well in this fight. And once the zombie and the devil are dead and the hag is the last one standing, she manages to mutter the words, "We tried to serve," and she doesn't finish her thought. It's a bit late in the encounter, but I will always appreciate a DM who at least includes some exposition in combat to make sure the scene still moves the story forward. Cranberry uses command to tell the hag to tell them who she serves, and they get a name out of her. Wormsack. Then they kill the hag, and the fight is over. However, I did want to point out a single moment from the episode that I thought was worthy of remark.
I would like to move kind of like over by Chutney.
Chutney. I'm going to Chutney. 5, 10,
Yeah.
15, 20, 25.
Recognize the alpha.
And
If, hypothetically, Chutney were going to make future appearances in other Critical Role one-shots or bonus content, that might be a phrase we'd go on to hear again. Now, like I said, the main thing that made this fight interesting was watching the players try to come up with fun, Christmas-themed versions of their spells and attacks. That's actually a big part of this entire session, and that's the kind of thing that can be tough to do. A lot of players aren't just able to whip out descriptions of their abilities, whether they're holiday-themed or not. But thankfully, if you're a player or a game master who struggles to describe stuff at the table, you can get some help in that department if you check out today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is an awesome online resource where a team of professional writers come up with scenes that you can read aloud at the table, whether you're a game master or a player. They've got descriptions of adventurers, spells, attacks, badass one-liners, NPCs, magic items, monsters, locations, and more. And if you're a fan of Critical Role or just have a very similar playstyle at your tables, you're probably a fan of complex tactical combat on gorgeous maps. And it can be really daunting to try to create these kinds of maps yourself, especially if that's not a skill you have, or if you're playing online, or you just don't have a lot of time to prep before your next game. But thankfully, Describe has a fantastic selection of digital maps that you can plug directly into your games, and each region of the map has its own description attached to it, so you can properly narrate each section of the map. And Describe is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payment. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thanks so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. The party loots the bodies, and Chutney takes the Devil's Tentacle Rod, which he can use. It's not a Warlock-specific item like I expected it to be. It's just a weird, dark weapon that lashes out at opponents. They check the body of the hag, and she's got worms in her hair and on her body. Gross. Now, Chutney suggests, Santa's gone. We could fill in for him, become the new heads of the North Pole. But setting aside the fact that there are other elves still around, Mrs. Claus is still alive, these folks are just sick, but they'll get better and won't take kindly to a hostile takeover. But even discounting that, Ellery insists they've gotta go save Santa. So they follow the three-toed footprints through the snow, they taste the area around the footprint, and it tastes almost like poop. Not quite, but close. Again, gross. So they shove the Star of Pure Intent in their bag to take it with them, and they hitch Blitz into the sleigh and fly off, following the tracks. They come to a ring of trees which seem to be arranged in a circle on top of a hill, with holiday-themed doors on the trees. One of the trees has a pumpkin on it, and that door is slightly ajar. They open the door, and they get yanked inside. And that's actually when Liam calls for a break, which is perfect. It's a nice cliffhanger before they come back to the table. And also, now they all definitively know that they're just doing Nightmare Before Christmas. And honestly, this is a really clever way to adapt this movie into a D&D game. A few years ago, I made a video encouraging you to steal from pop culture when running your D&D games. And I pointed out that it's a lot easier to do that when you're willing to show your hand and allow your players to know what you're ripping off. As we'll see later in the episode, Liam is not even trying to hide his influences here. He's just doing Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, it's his own adventure that is similar yet legally distinct from Nightmare Before Christmas. But yeah, he's just doing the movie. And because he doesn't care if his players figure out what he's referencing, he doesn't have to bend over backwards to figure out how to adapt the movie without making it obvious that's what he's doing. But there are still some challenges when it comes to adapting the plots of movies into your games. Specifically, you can't control what your players are going to do. That's why it's better to adapt a scenario rather than try to get the players to follow an exact plot. And that is especially true for The Nightmare Before Christmas, because if the players were going to take on the role of Jack Skellington and the other residents of Halloween Town, it would be pretty hard to convince them to go through with Jack's plan from the film. Because Jack's plan is a spectacularly bad idea, and that's obvious to anyone, even if they haven't seen the movie. So it would be pretty hard to get the players to buy into doing that terrible plan themselves. However, Liam found a completely new way to bring his players into the movie. He shifted the focus away from the residents of Halloween Town and onto the denizens of the North Pole. Now they are reacting to the events of the film, and they're able to rush in and potentially save Santa themselves. Additionally, knowing the plot of the movie at this point doesn't change anything about their scenario. They can't use that knowledge to save Santa because he's already been abducted. They can't use it to find their way to the villain's lair because knowing who the bad guy of the movie is doesn't mean they know how to get to him in the world of the game. So they still have to play D&D. But also, they get to be in a movie that they all love. Everybody wins. When the game resumes, the characters have emerged from a similar circle of trees, and they've entered a barren landscape. They follow the tracks to the only other landmark they can see, a huge dead tree with some sort of complex treehouse in its branches, almost a collection of shacks shoved together, spiraling up the tree. At first I thought this was Liam's way of interpreting Halloween Town, but I completely forgot that in the movie, Oogie Boogie's lair looks exactly like this. However, unlike in the film, there is no elevator for the characters to take. There's just a ladder 60 feet up that hasn't been pulled down all the way, like a fire escape in New York. So they basically have to get up the ladder. Now, there are pipes running down the tree and into the ground, so they could maybe climb those, but Cranberry tries and fails. And at this point, the players ask about rolling with advantage since they brought the star. But they pull out the star and discover that the ruby in the heart of the star is dark. It draws its power from belief in Santa, and that's not a thing here, so it has no power in Halloween Town. We also learned a little bit about Klaus's bona fides in combat. It seems he has quite the body count.
Would you still be laughing if you knew how many lives these gloves have taken?
How many lives?
637 prying eyes.
Wait, you killed 600 elves? Or
Elves, no. Only 3. But do you know how many people try and sneak into the North Pole every year?
I always thought
humans?
Mostly.
You're killing random explorers?
No. I'm killing thieves and burglars and men who are trying to take the shit you guys have been building.
We don't have a jail system? We don't have
I always thought the December red snows were a natural phenomenon outside their house.
Can I also point out that there's no posted signs saying no trespassing or any fencing at all? These people are just wandering.
Not my department.
How many climate scientists fell to classes?
I have a job, distinctly set, and I do it well.
Oh my God!
Well, that's pretty dark. Anyway, Arthur is able to climb the pipes and tie one of their 50-foot ropes under the bottom of the ladder, but they're still 10 feet shy. So Bunglestein jumps onto the end of the rope and everybody climbs up his body. Basically exactly like that episode of Friends on the fire escape, but in reverse. I honestly think this is just a really cool way to remind the players that, first of all, this new world is not very inviting to them. But also because they come from a world that's the appropriate size for Christmas elves, this piece of terrain reminds them that they are literally stepping into a world that is too big for them. I don't know if that's what Liam intended or not. Maybe he just wanted a moment where the elves had to work together and he based it off of a New York City fire escape. But regardless, the end result does essentially reinforce the themes of the story in a way that I think is really cool. They climb into the treehouse and explore the building, and in one room they find it is just full of gore. There are just enough remains to identify a victim. A leprechaun. There may have been other figures killed in here as well, but the only identifiable remains belong to a leprechaun. And I get the sense, based on how many games I've seen Liam run, that he would have included more identifiable remains if there were other mythological figures killed here, like a turkey or a rabbit or Cupid. In the next room, they find a dark coffin, and inside the coffin is a shart. Probably not that. In the next room, they find a dark coffin, and inside the coffin is a sharp, barbed short sword. Arthur takes it, and can we just appreciate for a minute that a DM on Critical Role included a magical, clearly sinister sword in a game, and somehow didn't wind up in Travis's hands? That's kind of bizarre, actually. Although in fairness, the sword doesn't seem to be sentient, so that probably makes a big difference. In the next room, they find the ruins of its science lab, as well as a cauldron with some child bones inside. They fish out a slipper that seems to match the description of the slippers of spider climbing, but they don't find its mate. So if they are right that it was one of the pair of magic items, they weren't able to use them. And at last they enter the final chamber, where Wormsack stands atop a whirling mechanical tower with Santa tied to a table next to him. Wormsack, of course, looks and talks a lot like Oogie Boogie from The Nightmare Before Christmas, and just like that character, he is also a canvas sack full of bugs. And just like Oogie Boogie, he's got a very elaborate mechanical murder room, which Liam represents with this really cool map, with these discs of paper or cardstock wrapped around a plastic pole. And these discs actually move at certain points throughout the fight. I think on Wormsack's turns, which keeps that part of the battle map very dynamic. The discs also have chains dangling off of them, which gives a very video gamey vibe. The players compare it to Donkey Kong. And that's cool design because, as we'll see shortly, the discs are dangerous, but there are also ways to get up between the levels, which is really good design. This terrain is both a hindrance, but also invites the players to scale it and interact with it. And it's initiative, so here are some highlights. Claus steps on the first disc, and immediately the column in the center opens up, and a gelatinous cube gets launched at Klaus, who is engulfed in the cube. Once it comes to Klaus's turn, he actually does a ton of damage to the inside of this cube, despite being restrained by it. Matt is kind of a beast as Klaus. And Ellery is able to finish off the cube with a spiritual weapon, which is flavored to look like a fruitcake. Wormsack summons a giant wasp because he's got bugs in him. It's thematically fitting. When Bunglestein gets onto the tower, a huge iron D20 rolls out, and Bunglestein dodges it. Considering everything we know about Liam, it's honestly kind of surprising he didn't actually throw an iron die on the table. But the players are all forced to watch as Wormsack makes good on his threat, and whips out a huge, black, shiny bug arm, and plunges it down into Santa, stabbing him real good. Nutmeg uses Dimension Door to bring Klaus up to Santa and Wormsack. And Klaus had a ready to action, so he unloads some attacks on Wormsack. And at this point, a new combatant enters the field, a creature with white, translucent skin and black eyes and long claws, and he calls out and says he started this, and things have gone too far, and he commands Wormsack to release Santa. Then his jaw splits open and a huge long tongue pours out. It kind of seems like his appearance is at least partially inspired by a ghast, and obviously thematically, he's Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas. The players continue making their way up the tower, dodging traps like another spiked ball that pops out and hits Arthur. But on top of the tower, Claus is able to unload an ungodly amount of damage into Wormsack, more so than anybody else at the table is doing. Matt is really able to cut loose as a player. We love to see it. And of course, he offers a lot of fun, flavorful descriptions, like how he uses candy canes to essentially fishhook Wormsack from both sides of his mouth.
What's fish hooking?
What's fish hook? Thanks, man. That would have been really hard to describe.
And as he does that, Liam responds by describing how bugs spill out of Wormsack's mouth. In fact, when he takes a ton of damage, he basically drops so many bugs that Liam puts down a mini for a small swarm of bugs, adding an opponent to the battlefield. Still, Wormsack tries to hit Claus, fails, and runs away, taking an attack of opportunity. But this is where we get to see how Wormsack is able to stay alive so long in this fight. See, typically when the entire party unloads on one enemy, it's going to be a pretty fast fight. And Wormsack doesn't really have a ton of abilities to take on all of these elves. Sure, he's got a gelatinous cube and a giant wasp in the fight, but those honestly aren't doing that much to keep him alive. But he can scurry down the chain to the next level below, and at least get a little bit of distance from Claus and some of the other really dangerous foes. Not because they can't catch up with him, but because just trying to catch up with him is itself dangerous. And the tower itself is constantly keeping the players on their toes, and potentially knocking them off the tower and giving Wormsack more time. So it's a really dynamic battlefield. And as we're going to discuss in an upcoming video next week, the right choice of battlefield can make a huge difference in how the fight goes. That being said, having a good ally on your side helps a lot too. And so with Cranberry clutching onto him, the Hallow King leaps onto the tower and also attacks Wormsack. That's what the Jack Skellington equivalent is called, by the way, the Hallow King. I don't know if I mentioned that. Now, if you haven't seen this one-shot before, you might be thinking, okay, this seems like a fun session, but Mike, you called this episode iconic and chaotic, and it's neither of those things? And you're right, this has been a fun session, but it's not infamous. Not yet. Enter Travis Willingham. See, throughout this entire episode, Chutney has continued to talk about how, you know, they could just take over for Santa. And even as they're here and trying to rescue Santa from a bug monster, he still tells Claus to end his reign. In fact, on Klaus's last turn, he specifically described how he saw that look in Chutney's eye, and so he chose to use a healer's kit to stabilize Santa, and he's keeping his eyes fixed on Chutney. And by the way, Liam describes the healer's kit as a bunch of marshmallows that Claus shoved into the wound, and that's very gross, but also a really fun detail. But now it's Chutney's turn.
Chutney!
Yeah?
Yeah,
Stand up.
It's a good time.
And Wormsack is no longer there. But there's the fat man. I could do this.
Oh my god.
I move towards Saint Nick. He told me to make Voltron out of wood.
Oh my god.
No one wanted it. He told me to make a Game Boy. I can't do circuits. He told me to make the little trolls, but the hair didn't move. And I'll take my wooden chisel. Are there any restraints on Santa?
Yeah, he's tied down.
I stab him in the chest!
Make an attack and advantage. It's auto-crit.
That's
Automatic crit.
25.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
With just 6 words, this became one of the most iconic one-shots in Critical Role history. And I think you could argue that Travis often plays the more id, unhinged character. Grog is very much like that, and there's also some of that with some more of his future characters. But I honestly think players tend to especially lean into these wild impulses with one-shots, because they know there's no real consequence to doing crazy stuff. However, in this case, I actually think Travis sidestepped a lot of the issues I see with truly deranged one-shot characters, because this seems like the obvious end result of what Chutney's been talking about all episode long. Because Travis has been very clear about his character's feelings of bitterness towards Santa. He actually said at the end of the episode that he's been brewing on these feelings of Santa resentment ever since he saw the character art. And so throughout the episode, he's been reminding the other players that Chutney wants the elves to take over for Santa. Here's a clip of that exact thing back outside the tree fort.
Well, no Santa, time to go back. We're going forward.
How long have you been formulating this plan?
I'm a realist, okay? I read the landscape and I adapt. That's how I stayed alive this long.
When Sam asks how long Chutney has been planning to ditch Santa, that helps to demonstrate that the other players are picking up on everything Travis is laying down about how bitter and weird Chutney is. And in fact, remember how Matt specifically made sure to stabilize Santa, specifically because he knew Chutney's turn was coming up? That's how you know that Travis's foreshadowing was working. The reason this doesn't feel like a crappy, it's what my character would do moment that we read about on Reddit is because that phrase is almost always used as a defense of objectionable behavior after the fact. But here, Travis doesn't need to say it, because while the other players might be shocked and horrified, it didn't come out of nowhere. Travis isn't doing this purely for the lulz or for the vine. He's doing it because it made sense for the character, and because he just spent 4 hours building up to it. So when this moment arrives, the other players don't think Travis is a selfish player or that he's an asshole or anything like that. They think he's a madman, sure, but I don't think any of them are pissed at him. And that's because of all the work Travis did to preemptively justify his Santa hatred throughout the session. So once again, Travis Willingham getting away with doing things most players cannot do because he just respects everyone at the table and he treats them well. And that's all it is. That's how easy it is. We love to see it. Anyway, Nutmeg fires Agonazar's Scorcher at Wormsack, although she renames it as Ebenezer's Scorcher, which is a really nice detail. And she splits him open, spilling the bugs within and creating another swarm, but slaying Wormsack. Bunglestein frees Santa, and Arthur attacks one of the swarms of insects, and Liam reveals that the sword is a sword of vengeance, so Arthur can't stop fighting until the swarm of insects is dead. And then we come back to the only subplot that any of them can think about right now.
As I'm holding the candy cane forward, I say to him, do you intend to finish what you started?
We could be rich. We could sell off the land. We could end the suffrage of the elves. We could be property owners. Think of the magic. Think of the magic.
What are you guys talking about?
I glance back and look at the innocent eyes.
Oh no. I'm just a stable hand.
What?
Of this bushy-tailed, if he had a tail, you know, elf who looks through the world with such joy, and back at the old, withered, angry elf.
Time to decide if you're gonna be a man.
Oh my god.
You know what these gloves are for, right?
I do.
And I unleash a full round of attacks on you. Now what's it gonna be?
You're a fool, Claus. You can't compete with Amazon.
At this point, Liam just describes that the other players can dispatch the bug swarms, they've got spiritual weapons on the field and a magic sword, they're fine. So he wants to resolve this storyline. So the Hallow King also attacks Chutney and then demands an explanation.
I've been underappreciated my whole life. I never learned any new skills. No one loves wood and metal toys anymore. I just wanted to be on top for once. I'm sorry.
This bag of humbug here decided to go ahead and try and take the business for himself. Planted a blade into your chest. And, well, my judgment is the same judgment you've had me give a few times. But ultimately, it's up to you, Santa.
Well, I think that...
And the pale one kneels down.
Wait. I am to blame. I started this mess. I mean to make amends.
And he takes the rib and reaches out and places it on Santa Claus's knee.
Worry yourselves no more.
And giant claws reach out and grab Chutney. And you watch as the pale one leaps from the top and descends into darkness.
Oh man.
Oh. Oh, jeez.
That makes it easy.
Wow.
Was that a
Santa.
weak ho 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 you just started to do?
Oh, holy shit.
It's real close.
Santa, can I make a suggestion? For the future of the company, I think we should maybe set up a system where we have, you know, a jail if people do something wrong instead of killing them. Maybe like a judicial system.
Well, I was going to suggest that we put Chutney in the home. He's clearly worked too many centuries.
There's a home? You don't just straight up kill people if they do something wrong?
Of course not. What kind of jolly old elf do you take me for? He looks at his watch. Goodness gracious, we have to get out of here. Everyone, gather around.
Santa turns everyone into clouds. Keyleth reference? I don't know. And then they fly back to the North Pole. There, Mrs. Claus and Bixby have gotten the sleigh ready for Santa, and he takes off and begins his midnight ride to deliver presents. And Liam delivers a lovely sign-off referencing the night before Christmas with some rhyming language about Santa taking off to the skies. But let's be honest, the players are really only talking about one thing when this game is over.
And that's why we put chutney next to every cheese plate. Or every humble fog.
Now, children, if you don't want Chutney visiting you, make sure you get at least one wooden toy every Christmas. Otherwise, it comes for your hands.
Man, that really zigged when I thought it was gonna zag.
Thank you so much for watching. We should be back next week with a new Critical Role Demystified video to discuss episode 71, Voragal. The party is going to face the White Dragon with a Green Dragon and hopefully a Garistro on their side. What could possibly go wrong? Find out next week. But also I'm planning to put out some other videos next week, so if you want to make sure you get notified whenever I release bonus videos, which I should be doing a lot next week, fingers crossed, then subscribe and ring the bell. You can also join my Patreon if you want to support the channel, and you can get some cool rewards like maybe commissioning a bonus episode of Critical Role Demystified, and also maybe other stuff. And if that's not in the cards right now, that is okay. I would still love to have you just join my Discord server. You can hang out with some other awesome people. It's great. And you can sign up for my newsletter to stay in the loop about my latest happenings. I've got some really cool stuff planned for the new year, and so you can be a part of that as soon as it happens if you're looped in through the newsletter. Last month I made a video all about the incredible art in the new D&D Player's Handbook. I would love it if you would watch that video and show it some love. It was a really fun video to make. Some people slept on it, and I think that was a shame. I think it's a great video. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.